Hi, everyone. Welcome to our peer mentor session. I'm Judy, and I got to spend the morning today with some of the peer mentors, and this video is for those of you who couldn't make the session. So if you've joined us and you're not part of the University of Saskatchewan College of Education Peer Mentors Group, that's a-okay. We're here to talk a little bit about some components of the human curriculum, which really is a catch-all phrase for all things therapeutic teaching and therapeutic leadership and support. So when I teach the human curriculum, I sometimes teach components of my own research, and other times I teach components of other people's works. And previous to this session, I had a great opportunity in September to spend a couple of hours with the peer mentors, and I covered all things human curriculum. We talked about self-care, mental health, and really just how to show up for ourselves in terms of using self-compassion, exercising boundaries, and just some of the things that we can do to support ourselves to be well as leaders, and knowledge and information that we can share with those with whom we work or lead or support. This session today, we're going to carry on with a little bit of review around self-care roles and goals as leaders. The peer mentor group is a leadership group. So this is for you as persons and as professionals. And then we're going to talk a little bit about why we struggle or suffer. Within that, I'm going to frame for you an understanding of basically our window of tolerance. So that's our tolerance for stress and distress. I'm going to use Bruce Perry's work to support me in framing that. I'm going to use a little bit of polyvagal components as well. That's Stephen Porteous, Deb Dana's work, to help frame an understanding of the nervous system, right? That's the system that connects our brain, mind, and body. And I'll talk about why that's important in understanding mental health. And then I'm going to talk about something that's known as internal family systems. And that is the research of Richard Schwartz. And he coined the term from some theoretical work and perspectives around understanding the different parts that exist up here, right? And, when it comes to internal family systems, sometimes people are a little bit confused that therapeutic approach is meant to target or support family groups. And actually what it refers to is just the internal systems or families, as I noted, that exist in the mind. So this framework or philosophy is built on the notion that we have many parts inside of us. They go by many names. They have many different goals and roles in supporting us to protect ourselves, connect with others as we need it, and maintain survival. So we're going to talk about supporting our mental health from the neurological perspective, the brain, mind, body, and the psychosomatic perspectives in terms of polyvagal parts of us that we can get to know and support when it comes to our well-being. We're going to talk a little bit about developing some confidence and competence in this language to use it as a support for us as leaders. And then we're going to end by talking a little bit about task management. So given that, I'm going to kind of share with you what our goals of this presentation are. And, the timing's off there. And what I hope to do with you. And then I'm going to jump to why we're framing today the way that we have. So overwhelm, transitions, decision-making, and time management are part of our goals today. And really what that means is I'm going to teach you a little bit about the components of things that help us to or get in the way of decision-making, action planning, and achieving success. And this part is specifically tied to my human curriculum model, where I use the framework of aware, care, and cope. So I'll weave that in as I can throughout this session as well. We'll be together here for about 60 minutes, I'm going to say, give or take. I spoke this morning for 50 minutes exactly. This evening's session or recorded session is probably going to be around 10 to 15 to 20 minutes longer, depending on how long I feel like chatting with you this evening. And if you have any questions or want any follow-up supports, you can find me at any of those handles, my university email or my Instagram handle, where I share lots of things around education, well-being, and research mental health. So let's dive in here. I wanted to start by framing this session with what the needs were. So you have a leader in terms of peer mentor and role model. That is Chelsea and Mercedes. You have a couple of leaders. And when they asked me to come and speak to you for this follow-up session this month in October, they specifically wanted me to target a couple of things that are cropping up in your lives. So they mentioned that the groups that you work with are composed of early career teachers, teacher candidates who are potentially feeling a little bit overwhelmed. The transition to university has been difficult. I mean, transitions in life in general are difficult, so that's a lifelong thing. Some of the educators you're working with are grappling with concerns about their decision to pursue education and managing their schedules effectively. These are all common things when it comes to our well-being, so there are no surprises there. Chelsea also mentioned that when you're doing your temperature checks, so anyone who knows me or works with me knows that we do a 2-number check-in at the beginning of everything that we do. We look at temperature, which is mood, and we look at stress, and we track those numbers and pay attention to how we're doing. When we pay attention to how we're doing, we sometimes typically can catch a baseline for how or what our norm might be, and then we can judge whether or not we're experiencing highs or lows with respect to or in relevance to that norm. So what you're noticing as peer mentors is that some of the students you work with are experiencing nervousness and feelings of being overwhelmed. So I want to address a little bit of that today. And then I want to talk about the most important piece to this hour. So if you stop this recording after a few minutes of hearing me talk because you're already bored or distracted, I want you to remember that your number one goal is supporting this nurturing environment for students. And how you do that is pretty simple. You show up and you be yourself, and you provide a safe and caring space for conversation and connection. 2 things, conversation and connection. Those are fundamental components to well-being. And if you don't remember anything about the research or the theoretical perspectives or the practical components that I tie in for you in this next hour or so together, I want you to remember that you're just going to show up and do your absolute best. And that's it. That's good enough. Sometimes when we do this work as leaders, we step into this role and then we experience this phenomenon of trying to be or feeling like we have to be all things to all people. And that's just simply not true. You cannot do that. Do not set yourself up to be a perfect leader who has all the answers, who can support everyone under the sun, or who shows up in your space. You're just going to do your best. You can't possibly be all things to all people. So remember that as well. And I want you to remember the next component to that is we can get overwhelmed with all kinds of tasks coming our way. And we can think about the big goals we have for our role as leaders. And that can trip us up or cause us to feel like a failure. It can also lead to the overwhelm that you're noticing with some of your students. What I want you to remember about this is that your job isn't to do it all. Your job is to just do the next needed thing. All right. So when it comes to the students who present in your space, when you're leading in any capacity, read the room, pay attention to what the humans in the space need. That ties back to some of the EQ, emotional quotient or intelligent components that we talked about in the first iteration of the human curriculum when we were together in September. Read the room, assess the needs, and just do the next needed thing for the people in that space. So if you were to stop right now, 10 minutes in, you'd have everything you need. Now, if you want to go a little bit further with me and understand some of the other components that I've prepared for you to talk about, let's go. All right, so I'm going to start by talking about principles of personal power for teachers and leaders. These are just straight up facts that we know about the human condition. These facts come from motivation theory. These facts come from behavior and change theory. And what I want you to do is just absorb them one by one knowing that they are true. They are elements of what it means to be human and move about the world, get along in the world. And if you want to know more than that, send me an email. We can discuss the research and the theory and the philosophies that come behind these statements that I hope pack a punch for you and also provide you with some direction moving forward to the rest of the presentation. So one of the first things we know about human beings is that we are all capable of growing and changing our behavior. Straight up fact, okay? You are the only one who can produce growth or change in attitudes and behaviors within yourself. It's up to you. You have the power to produce any growth or change in behavior in yourself that you want. Absorbing these, right? You cannot make anyone else grow or change their behavior. And this is a key feature of principles of personal power. As leaders and teachers, we can get caught up in thinking that we're going to make someone change. We're going to make someone see things differently. We're going to make somebody do something that we want them to do. That's because we're a little bit of a control freak. If we, those of us that find our ways to education and leadership, we like control. We like to organize people and ideas and make things happen. But unfortunately, we can't make anyone else grow or change their behavior. What we can do, so bad news, good news, is we can facilitate and support the growth or behavioral change another chooses, there's the key word there, through our relationship with them. So there's your next big component to add to the things I said in the first 10 minutes. You can facilitate immense growth and change for those who you lead through your relationship and through your connection with those people. So again, I'm going to share a lot of knowledge with you over the next hour. And I want you to just remember that who you are, who you bring to that space every day and show up as is more important than any of the knowledge that I'm going to share with you. Okay. I hope that the rest of this presentation is gravy in terms of adding to your skill set for supporting mental health and well-being, and that you show up as much as you can, a strong human being who takes care of themselves and is ready to support others and do the job that you signed up to do. So on that note, I'm just going to remind you that when we were together last time, we talked a lot about self-care, and I gave you some self-care menus to think about, digest, and consider in terms of taking care of your own well-being. These are certainly things that you can and should share with the students who you work with. I know that when we talk about self-care, I've been saying this a lot lately, we start to think self-care, self-schmare, who has time for this? But there is a ton of research behind every single one of these ideas and how I've laid them out to protect and support and soothe and calm and regulate your nervous system, or to connect you to others who can support and soothe and calm and regulate your nervous system. We were designed as human beings at the core to do two things: to protect and connect the physical body for survival and the mental, emotional, spiritual body for survival. So everything that's laid out in these 3 slides, which we looked at in larger form in a lot more detail the last time we gathered, is specifically organized around the chemicals or the endorphins in the body that they support. And so when we think about stress in our life, stress induces cortisol production. And to mitigate cortisol, we can add activities to our life that increase serotonin, that increase oxytocin, that support access to dopamine and healthy forms of adrenaline and other endorphins that keep us going, keep us excited, keep us motivated, and also keep us rested and connected and just capable to manage in life. And that's what self-care is. It's all about understanding what I can do to support myself to show up well and strong in the world. just do the best that I can, right? It's never about perfection. It's always about just doing our best. So on that note, if you recall last time, I gave everyone a self-care menu. I invited you to think about components of self-care. And when it comes to self-care, it's a choose your own adventure kind of activity. I like to journal. I like hot baths. I like to go out for a walk in the sun. I like to socialize. I like to do research and get really curious about knowledge acquisition. I'm a lifelong learner. Now, all of those things that I've just mentioned are part of my self-care routine, in addition to trying to eat healthy and getting enough sleep, and just generally taking care of myself. When it comes to self-care, you're looking at doing two things: protect activities that strengthen you and that you can use to strengthen your relationships with others and support others, or connect activities that strengthen the connections you have with yourself and others. So I do invite you, if you haven't yet taken much time to think about self-care, to think about how you can add self-care to your life and use it to support your well-being. And when you do that, you'll become the greatest salesperson for self-care activities for other people, because you'll have some evidence of the success of inviting self-care into your life and getting upstream of mental illness or distress, or some of the ails or ills in life that just hang us up when we're not participating in keeping ourselves well. So now I want to shift gears a little bit and move into what we're going to talk about today, what this presentation is focused around: understanding stress and overwhelm, and then moving to thinking about how we're doing and how we can build more or strengthened connections with ourselves as human beings to understand our experience of the world and then move through it with more confidence and potentially more competence. And then, as I said, we're going to end with a little discussion around task management and some things we can use to help ourselves. So I want to start by talking about what's known as state-dependent functioning. So this blue screen that you see here, or this blue chart that looks pretty busy, I'm going to spend a few minutes explaining it. But what you see here is from Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey's book. They have a book called What Happened to You: Conversations Around Trauma and Building Resilience. And I've studied with Bruce Perry a few times over the years and know a lot about his work in neurosequential models used in therapeutics, as well as his work in neurosequential models in education. And he does a great job of bridging the world of therapy and education to support teachers to understand the brain, basically, or the brain for the most part, but the brain-mind-body connection and things that we need to know about humans to help them learn. Now, Bruce Perry teaches us that our brain kind of has three basic components to it. We've got our mammalian brain, which is, those components in the back of the head, lower brainstem area. We have our limbic system, which has our amygdala and our hippocampus and some other components that are just keeping things going behind the scenes. And then we have our prefrontal cortex. Now, that is a really simplified explanation of the brain. If you know anything about the brain, you'll realize that that's a pretty simplified explanation, but that's all we really need to know to understand that. And I'm going to use Dan Siegel, his hand model here, to help me with this. So here's our brainstem. If this is our hand model, inside amygdala in there, and that limbic area in the midbrain, and then up here prefrontal cortex. So I like to use this because it provides a great handy model of what the brain can look like. And so Bruce Perry teaches us about some important things around regulation happening in the brainstem area. These are behind the scenes things that are happening, and our body is just doing naturally. We're not thinking about it, but we're just, regulating and going about the world, and the system is running how it does behind the scenes. Then, our midbrain, which stays pretty calm most of the time, but is paying attention to threat in the world. And if there is an alarm bell that's going off, this part of our brain has become very activated, And when it becomes activated, our prefrontal cortex goes offline because we don't need to think in order to fight off a saber-toothed tiger or a violent person that might be attacking our home or our camp. If we're thinking about primitive human beings, we want to just spring into action to save our lives. So the parts of our brain have different functions, essentially, and they work together to keep us alive. Now, when we're in different states, we have different abilities, and that's what Bruce Perry's model here shows us. I'm going to get you to particularly pay attention to the calm stage. And between calm and alert would be my online brain just functioning, going about its business, living its life. I've got if you're a university student, you've got a fairly high average IQ. You're able to think, reason, problem solve, be creative, be self-reflective, make decisions, work to strengthen your identity and your self-worth, and just generally function in the world when you're online and you're not living in a state of threat. Now, what happens when threats are increased, somebody attacks us or there's something happening in the space, a scary rabid dog, typically these parts of our brain were designed to deal with physical threats because that's what we experienced as more primitive human beings, were these physical threats to the environment. We would reach a state of alarm or fear. And that's when the brain goes, offline, when that barking dog or amygdala or whatever you want to call it comes flying out to the rescue. And it's on high alert to create some actions, fight, flight, worst case, freeze and do nothing to save us, right? And so this shows us that as the alarm increases, brain goes offline, and functional IQ decreases. So the more I'm living in a state of distress or stress, the lower my IQ is, the less I'm able to cognitively function. Now, why is this important information? Well, this is important information because I'm hearing from you that the people you're working with are feeling overwhelmed and they're questioning their choice, their life choices. And they're not able to manage tasks. And that makes complete sense. When I am overwhelmed, I can't think through or use the problem solving skills I need to slow things down and manage my tasks. I can do all those complicated things like task management over here when I'm calm. And what we're seeing in the world today through connections with human beings, some of the research that people are doing and producing, is that we live in a day and age where we have a very low tolerance to distress. So some people talk a lot about the state of the world today, which is very complicated, very complex. There's a lot going on. There are communities and countries at war. We have to deal with a lot with respect to diversity, equity, and inclusion to support everyone to feel like they have a place to belong. We have serious issues that are rooted in systems of colonization around the world, lots of harm and lots of trauma happening in the world today. Now, that said, if we look at human history over time, we are actually in one of the better places than we've been in the last couple of 100 years. If you look back 100 to 150 years ago, if you were living during that time, you would be living in a time where many of your family members and community members were dying via the plague, where people were starving, where poverty was extreme, or extreme poverty dynamics with respect to various socioeconomic status. You come forward 50 to 75 years to the mid-century, we've got world wars happening. And so there have been periods in our recent and not so recent human history where things were very different. And the states of alert, alarm, and fear that humans were living in 50 to 100 years ago were related to physical threats in the environment. Are we going to survive or not? And that's not to diminish the state of alarm that we're living in today. But the difference is the state of alarm that we're living in today is manifesting in mental projections and understandings and perspectives of the world. Whenever I'm in alarm and fear today, it's typically not because my life is at risk. I'm under physical threat. It's because I have deadlines, too many emails. I'm overwhelmed. I'm not able to take care of myself. Things are really expensive, and we work in an economy where many people have low paying jobs. There are all kinds of things that are happening that increase that burden on our minds. And the burden on our minds is what's creating alarm, fear, and terror today versus the physical threat to life that existed 50, 100, 200 years ago. So I hope that makes sense, and that you don't feel like I'm comparing our lives today and minimizing the stress that we deal with on a regular basis in 2024, because that's not what I'm meaning to do. But I'm meaning to put things in perspective in that when we lived in alert to alarm to fear and terror 100 years ago, it was for very different reasons than the reasons why we're living in these states today. Another thing I want to point out is that state-dependent functioning is in reaction to things in our environment that are real or perceived. So I can have a real threat enter this room right now. A grizzly bear comes flying into the room, or a rabid dog, or something happens in the space that creates a physical, real threat for me in this environment. Or I can move into states of alarm, fear, and terror by thinking my way there, a perceived threat. So if I have a lot of anxiety and I have to make a presentation and I'm getting worked up about it, I'm feeling overwhelmed, I'm feeling scared and anxious about how I'm going to show up online, that's going to create the same reaction in the body that a physical real in the room that's going to create. And so I can move from calm to alert to alarm to fear just by thinking my way there. That's important to understand as we consider moving forward to the latter half of this presentation, where I'm going to talk about some of the ways we deal with these mental ailments that can really hold us back at best, disrupt our lives, and or cause dysfunction, disorder, and disease at worst. So I wanted to frame that for you from the neurological or neurophysical perspective that Bruce Perry, psychologist, psychiatrist, shows us with respect to our states of being, and just point out that, all throughout the day, all throughout the week, all throughout the year, we are hopefully living in states of calm and alert, heightened states of alarm here and there. But if we find ourselves in this area for long periods of time, that's going to create long-term physical, social, and emotional impact and issues and concerns for us. So just like you're noticing that the students who you're working with are experiencing stress and overwhelm and an inability to manage or function sometimes with respect to organization around completing tasks, it could be that their stress is pushing them farther towards this end of the spectrum, and mentally they just are not able to cope and manage, right? Because of that impact on the cognitive prefrontal cortex, aka functional IQ. So that was a lot. I shared a lot of research there with you in a very short period of time. And if it kind of blew over you or washed over you like, wow, that's a lot of information, I invite you to pause, digest this map a little bit, kind of get a feel for what it means, and maybe even go back and listen to the last 10 or 15 minutes again, just to kind of get or situate yourself with respect to understanding this. What I'm going to do now is move into sort of a more polyvagal parasympathetic nervous system psychosocial perspective on health. So away from this brain-based neurological explanation to show you how these different states manifest in life for us as humans. And as I show you each of these upcoming components, I'm going to invite you to think about what state are you mostly living in as a leader. And as soon as you recognize one of the components, as I bring up the 5 different areas, write it down and note that. I also want you to think, so your second task in the next few minutes is to see if you can name where your students are, those who you're leading, where they might fall. So you can get a sense of where your nervous system is, how it's handling stress, and where your students' nervous systems are. And all of this work is going to lay the foundation for just a solid understanding of some basics around mental health and well-being, which again, as I've said, in the next half hour or so after I'm done talking about this, we'll move to thinking about in terms of our various parts and understanding ourselves. So I'm going to bring up a couple of green bars that are going to cover up each of these areas and give us the explanations that I talked about there from a parasympathetic perspective. So in the calm state, we are in a place where we feel safe. You know, we can tend to our needs quite easily. We're pretty calm, cool, and collected. We have lots of social connections, you know, that tend and befriend is activated, keeping us happy, bringing us joy, maybe even being a little playful. Our systems are able to rest and digest. And, you know, we present as human beings who are present in the moment, alert, flexible, mindful, compassionate, connected, all these great things, grounded, feeling pretty good. Overall, our system is regulated. Our breathing is nice and deep. It's nice and slow, not like mine is right now because I'm a little bit activated, right? You know, I've talked to you before about how I have anxiety. That's a part of who I am and how I ride through the world. So I am in a bit of an alert state and sometimes even an alarm state when I'm making a presentation. So my breath is all up here in my chest. It's very tight right now. But when I'm done doing things like this and prior to, I do a lot of breathing exercises to support calming that part of my nervous system. But when we're regulated, we're breathing nice and deep. Our heart rate is, you know, in that 60 to 80 zone, that calm zone. And, you know, we just have a general desire for being well and connected with other human beings. So remember, I asked you to kind of list where you think you are. So if you think you're in the calm state, you know, just make a note of that. And then also, as I mentioned, consider where your students or those who you're leading might also be. So the next phase is into this alert stage. So if we're thinking about Dan Siegel's handy model of the brain, that amygdala might be a little bit triggered. It's like, oh, something's going on. So we're not maybe totally offline, but it's like, something's changed. It's that state of alert. And in this state, our safety might be threatened physically, socially, or emotionally. It could be real or perceived. And we might be feeling urges to protect and connect with other people. Our breath might get a little tighter. Certainly, there's less digestion happening because we don't need to digest food in fight or flight. So as our body is preparing for that, it's going to shut down some of the energy that it uses to digest food because that takes a lot of energy. We might be feeling fear. We might be alerted, agitated, frustrated, disconnected, irritated. You know, this is the me who's in line at the Tim Hortons and the person in front of me is ordering breakfast for 100 people. And then the system shuts down and I'm late for work and my kids were screaming on the way out the door. You know, some of us go into this state of alert just via the nature of everyday life stuff. And so, you know, don't be surprised if you kind of go between calm and alert pretty regularly, regulated, dysregulated. I would say this is probably the norm. But what we want to do is make sure that we have ways to bring us back down to calm. Like I said, I do deep breathing activities, mindfulness, a little bit of exercise. I try to sleep well. So that's going to just help keep my system from going into overdrive, moving from alert to a state of alarm. So in an unchecked system, in a body that is in an environment where it doesn't feel safe, it definitely is triggered and threatened, we are going to move to more of a state of numbness or disassociation. This might be the place where we're just going through the motions because we're starting to feel like we need to shut down. We are feeling some sense of overwhelm, the alarm bells, panic, worry. We might be just complying, like whatever you say I need to do, I'll do it, because we don't have the energy for anything else. And we might be feeling lonely or abandoned here, and this is where some of our students might feel like, I've made the wrong decision. I don't fit in here. I don't belong. This isn't right for me. Those are signals that someone is moving from a state of alert to potentially a state of alarm. Now, that reminds me to remind you that we don't use any of this stuff prescriptively, right? We're not doctors. I am a doctor of the mind and a doctor of philosophy, but I'm not a medical doctor. And so I don't look at the way that someone's behaving and diagnose them or pathologize it in any manner. This is just giving you language for understanding the human condition, right? So that's the extent of how I want you to use and shape your use of this knowledge. So we can also feel shut down and trapped here. And if things get worse, so AKA they don't get better, and this barking dog amygdala system is just triggered, constantly, there's no time for calm because it's high alert all the time, we can move into this fear state. And again, as you notice, the higher the fear, the lower the IQ, the lower the cognitive function. In fear, we have a lot of adrenaline and cortisol coursing through our systems. We probably, if this has been going on for a long time, have inflammation. I've certainly dealt with that myself. Some cell damage over time. This is where dysfunction in life can become disorder or disease in the body. So in this state, I potentially have a perspective where I'm thinking about a lot of shame and blame, either towards myself or towards others. I might be thinking about self-harm or have some suicide ideation or suicidal thoughts. And I might feel completely frozen and stuck, like things are never going to change for me. And, we feel that way because we're being run by all of these coursing chemicals and we're not able to get calm enough and online where we can think, rationalize, problem solving. All these skills up here in green go down the further up the line we go. So I want you to remember that. We can get to a point where we just simply can't function, and our sensory system, the whole thing, is on overdrive to the point of disorientation. And, again, we can imagine that's not a healthy place to be living. And then, of course, a final stage of living in terror or massive amount of threat, which I hope that nobody is feeling at this point in time. Certainly, this is where you would want to be sure that you were getting help for people, is if, they were disassociated, living in pain, very low energy, unable to keep energy from the food or water that they're drinking, things like that. What I'm thinking from what I'm learning about the people that you're working with is that most of the students you're working with are in this zone here. And you yourself could be anywhere from this early zone to this mid zone here, depending on the day of the week. Other things we want to remember here is that, life is like waves in the ocean. Things go up and down. And if we are taking care of ourselves and we can have perspective on how we're doing, we will understand that, okay, this is a low point, but it's not going to last forever. I don't need to feel hopeless here. Things are going to get better soon. And then we ride the wave up and we enjoy that time. And then things go down again. Just understanding that we're kind of flowing with the state of life. If you find that you're low all the time, that's an area for concern. Or if you have a lot of anxiety, so you're beyond excitement and you're in the realm of constant over planning and overbooking and over organizing and people pleasing, it's way up here all the time. You want to be careful about that as well. So we look for states of hyperarousal way up here and hypoarousal way down here. And we want to be hopefully just riding nicely through those ups and downs. That's what's known as our window of tolerance, the safe zone there in the middle, which can be impacted by all kinds of things: trauma, disease, illness, sickness, mental health. So there's a quick little bit about that as well. So this framing, again, just gives you some of the neurological or psychological, as well as somatic and psychosocial components of understanding mental health from a holistic couple of frameworks. So my hope is that in the last 20 minutes, you kind of got a basic understanding of state-dependent functioning, and that we don't want to be living in states of alarm and fear for very long. How we bring ourselves down from this end of the spectrum towards this calmer end is through self-care that's meaningful for us. So again, if you notice that yourself or your students are in any of these areas in the middle, self-care can help to calm the nervous system. That's what I've mentioned before around the self-care directives from the 3 frames that I've shared with you. Protect, connect, work to increase serotonin, work to increase oxytocin, and decrease cortisol to help get yourselves quickly or a little more quicker back to a baseline of calm and alertness. So if you have any other questions about this, because I've shared a lot of information again in a very short period of time, reach out to me, ask me questions. I said to the group today that when I throw it out there that people are welcome to email me, I get like 1% feedback. So I'm not overwhelmed by that at all. Feel free to just send an email if you'd like to learn a little bit more about this or have a coffee and chat about that. Before I move on from here, I'm just going to share or remind you that the components of aware, care, cope, and that's in the work that I shared with you last time, being aware of what's happening, applying strategies to help take care of our bodies and using them in times of stress to cope, is what we're aiming for. That's our goal. And to know that throughout our lifetime, we're going to need to apply these strategies and use these tools to take care of ourselves, because it's aware, care, cope, followed up by cope, manage, grow, heal, repeat. Because life changes, it's constantly changing, it's never staying the same. So we don't ever arrive at the end zone and you know, kind of cheer ourselves free from stress. It's something that's going to come and go. So aware, care, cope, manage, grow, heal, repeat. One other thing I wanted to talk about before I move on here relates to some of the things I've said about our time in the world today and our inability to tolerate distress tolerance and discomfort. So because we live in the world that we live in today, we've been pretty much trained that for the most part, we're going to have access to food and education. That's a privilege, clean water, and where we live in, you know, the 21st century is in a place where, you know, we can have our needs met relatively quickly. You know, this is a stage of life where if 100 years ago you provided somebody with a little window into the future, they'd be like, sign me up. Those people have everything they need. I can get Starbucks delivered to my door. If I need information, I can find it very quickly via any number of devices in my world. I have access to a lot of technology and things that, you know, even 30 years ago, people didn't have access to. What that's done for us as humans is it's decreased our ability to tolerate even the stress of things taking an extra minute when the internet is slow. And that can make us very adverse to difficulty. It can almost make us delusional in terms of our expectations of the world. And we start like getting these expectations that we're going to have access to everything we need. And then we don't have it. And we can very easily start to feel like or see the world through this lens of lack when we actually have the opposite. We have a lifestyle that, you know, we very easily can access the things we need, but we focus on the negativity. So that's a little bit about what's going on in the world as well, in addition to increased access to things like drugs, alcohol, and social media, which are all distractions that can be healthy if we use them appropriately, but become addictions and places where we can disassociate, isolate, and distance ourselves from reality if we spend too much time there. So those are things I invite you to think about in terms of also your own self-care. Do you have boundaries around time spent on the phone? Do you have boundaries around how much alcohol or drugs you consume or use to mitigate or manage or moderate your stress? And do you have a perspective on the things you're adverse to, places where you have less patience or you have high expectations? And what I do with this knowledge is I journal about it. I write about it and I think about it. And I try through my own inner dialogue that I get out onto the page to have conversations with myself, because that perspective can increase my well-being and decrease stress, even just giving a little bit of attention to those important things that can, you know, decrease my sense of well-being. All right, the final phase, or the closest to the final phase of this presentation is a little discussion on parts and internal systems. I'm going to attempt to show you a 2-minute clip from Inside Out 2, and I'm hoping it works in this Zoom platform. If it doesn't, then we're just going to have a little blip and I'll send you the link. You can watch it on your own. But I'd love to watch it with you and then come back and talk about internal systems and how they can help us deal with all the things I just spent the last 45 minutes or so talking about. So let's give it a go here and see how we do.
Orange? Who made the console orange?
Do I look orange? I didn't touch it.
Orange is not my color.
Hello, everybody. Oh my gosh, I am just such a huge fan of yours. And now here I am meeting you. Okay, how can I help? I can take notes, get coffee, manage your calendar, walk the dog, carry your things, watch your sleep.
Wow, you have a lot of energy. Maybe you could just stay in one place.
Anything. Just call my name and I'm here for you.
Okay, love that. And what was your name again?
Oh, I'm sorry. I can get ahead of myself. I'm anxiety. I'm one of Riley's new emotions, and we are just super jazzed to be here. Where can I put my stuff?
What do you mean, we?
I wish I was as cool as all of you.
Who the heck are you?
I'm Effie.
Oh,
Oh, yeah, not happening.
hey, who's
What's your name, big fella? That's embarrassment. He's not really big on eye contact or like good talking, but he's a really sweet guy.
Well, welcome to headquarters, embarrassment. Oh, we're doing a fit. No. Oh, nope. Going high. Oh, you got a real sweaty palm there, buddy.
what emotion was that?
That's ennui.
On what?
Ennui. It's what you would call the boredom.
Here on work. Am I saying it right? And wow. Oh, I'm gonna call you Wee Wee.
No.
We all have a job to do. You make Riley happy. Sadness makes her sad. Fear protects her from the scary stuff she can see. And my job is to protect her from the scary stuff she can't see. I plan for the future. Oh, we can show you. You're gonna love this.
I was using that as a cup holder.
Okay, so my team has run all the data and we're looking at the following likely scenarios. First, we don't take this camp seriously and we goof off with Bree and Grace. Riley looks really uncool in front of Val. She fails to impress the coach, does not become a firehawk, and finally arrives at high school. She has no one. She eats alone and only the teachers know her name.
Okay, you and I are going to be friends.
This is a sad story.
It's a ridiculous story. Look, again, love the energy. Silly. Will actually happen.
Whatever you say, you're the boss. I am truly sorry.
All right. Just get myself reoriented there. I'm glad that worked. I hope you were able to get a sense of all of the things that are going on in Riley's head. And if you have any familiarity with Inside Out, you'll know that all of these wonderful characters are like characters that pop up in our own lives, good, bad, or ugly. They're all doing their best to help us understand the world. And that's what families or internal family systems parts work is all about. So we're going to move into talking about that. And then that'll be it almost for today. Okay, so the parts of ourself. And here we are, another little cartoon. One ticket. Really? I know I'd need about 12 if we were inviting everyone to the table. So parts of the self, we are made up of parts. That's the first thing I want you to understand, that there is, I sometimes use the term me, myself, and I. There are many components to us up here in our heads. And we also, in addition to having all these parts, have kind of a one true, positive, altruistic, true to self core, right? That's the true self, the real self. How I think about that is, me personally, I talk about it in terms of having like me, myself, and I up in my head. And then there's the observer part of me that's watching all of this chatter happening. And so that's the part of myself that I call my true self, the self that's watching or listening to all of the conversations and all of the thoughts that are coming and going. And connecting with that true self is key for, building that relationship with yourself that you want to have to maintain strength in difficult times and support your own mental health and well-being and that of others. Our parts battle for power and control. This is important that we understand that this is what happens and why it happens. So our parts battle for power and control because they're there to protect us in the world today based on typically events from our past that, maybe our true self didn't have the knowledge or skills or ability to take care of ourselves in, right? So this might be relevant whether we've experienced trauma or not. We develop these different parts of ourselves, these managers and micromanagers that show up to take care of us. They're there to protect us and connect us to supports, sometimes in really bossy, rigid, fierce ways. The bottom line is all our parts are good. They're not bad. They give us information. And if you were part of the session I gave in September, I talked a little bit about 3 parts, mad, sad, and scared. And I shared with you a little activity where I got you to focus on one of those emotions. And we imagined some of the big, bad, ugly ways it shows up in our life. And then I asked you to think about imagining that this emotion was your friend. And what is it telling you you need? So all of our parts are giving us information, whether it's the people pleaser part, the anxious part, the angry part, the disassociated part. All of them are there to give us information about what we need. So if we can dial into that, we can use that knowledge to support well-being. And that's why we do this kind of work. How we do this kind of work is by strengthening the core self, self-compassion, boundaries, self-care, and lots of other activities that support healing and personal empowerment. So I'm going to lead you into a little framing of these parts, these internal systems. And I want you to think about if you see yourself in any of the components that I'm going to bring up here. So the parts work or internal systems work tells us, first of all, that our parts are kind of broken down into 4 separate areas. And these areas are managers and firefighters that are meant to protect and connect us, right? So managers try to micromanage and control everything. Firefighters, put out the fire in any way it can to help us get away from the problem. And then exiles, which are vulnerable parts of the self that exist And sometimes because they are vulnerable, we hide them away and don't want to talk about them, don't want to think about them because they cause us pain. And then sometimes they rear their ugly heads and show up in our lives when we don't want to have anything to do with them, because they're there again to support us. So before I jump into that, I just want to show you what I think or how I define the self. Okay. So I define the self as someone who is supportive. All human beings want to be supportive of their own thrival and their own survival. We are evolving, constantly growing and learning. We are loving. Love is at our core. It's the primary emotion, and we are fierce. So with this in mind, we can use some of this knowledge to help us learn and grow and show up in all kinds of ways that are conducive to well-being. So here are some protector, connector, managers that these are the labels that we put on those parts of ourselves that good, bad, or ugly show up in our lives. And when they're contributing to ill health, they're depleting well-being. I invite you to look at that and see if you see yourself in any of those labels. I know for me, I have a lot of managers. I can say yes to almost all of those, probably 90% of the words in that block. I'm like, check, check, check. Lots of managers in my life, in my internal system. But take a minute, pause the video, and just see if you see yourself there. And if any one of those words could be used to describe you, if you would use any of those words to describe parts of you, just jot them down and take note of them. The next part I want to show you are the firefighter parts. So these parts allow us to avoid or disassociate or just get away from altogether some of the things that cause us stress. They show up in the form of addictions or self-harm, controlling behaviors like eating disorders, risks, fantasy thinking, high anxiety, panic, shutdown. All those kinds of things are firefighters. And again, I invite you to do the same thing with each of these components. Pause the video and just jot down if any of these words could be used to describe you. They'll give you a sense of who your parts are. Some of us are going to have more, some of us are going to have less, and this might give us information and maybe even some themes that we can attend to if we do some parts work. All right, so supporting our parts. The next few minutes, I'm just going to talk about some ways that you can do that. And really, with these next two slides, I invite you to screenshot them and use them for personal reflection. When you do, or if you do parts work with the students who you're leading, or even in your classrooms, I've given you a handout that Chelsea should give you. It's a 8-page, so 4 pages stapled, double-sided handout with some parts work information. This comes from a man named Roger Goddard, who created between 2019 and 2022 a teacher manual that includes a training handbook for using internal family systems to improve teacher effectiveness and student success. So Roger has created some resources that I've just given a snapshot of for you in terms of understanding parts and how we can use them in contexts like classrooms. And I want to remind you of the disclaimer that I give everyone when I share components of the human curriculum, whether they're from my research or my theories or my frameworks, or that of others like Goddard and Schwartz and Perry and Siegel and some of the other names that I've shared with you today, is that we want to use these materials to do our job as teachers therapeutically. We do not want to use these materials to become therapists or to do therapy in the classroom. We're not trained for that. So when you do this work, I want you to invite people into it gently. I want you to share with them that they are invited to think about the parts of themselves that are maybe getting in their way, but that they don't have to go super deep. We're not looking to pull back the curtain on some big exiles. When we go back here a moment and look at some of these things, if I'm looking at some of these words and the roots of some of these parts that show up in my system, I could be uncovering some big trauma or some big components of my life that maybe re-traumatize me. And we don't want to do that in classrooms as teachers. We will work with things on the surface that help support learning and understanding. And we'll invite our students to take this work further if they want to, with a therapist or with a loved one, in a nice, safe environment. So if you notice, one of the exiles here and is overwhelm. If we're going to work with overwhelm, we're going to invite students to name it to tame it. That's what Dan Siegel says. Name the things that cause them stress and grief, like overwhelm, and get to know it a little bit more. But we're not asking people to rip off Band-Aids all over the place and unpack trauma. That's not our job as educators. So take a look at the additional materials I gave you. Do a little bit of research around the components of parts work and maybe into some of the things I shared earlier in terms of philosophies and understanding around the brain, mind, body connection, and formulate enough of enough knowledge that you can safely invite students to do some of this work to support their well-being. And again, if you need help with that, reach out to me. But if you take a look at the handout that you may or may not have with you right now, pages 3 to 5, outline for you common protectors, common exiles, and there's even a page that is for common teacher-related protectors. And so these are labels like the exhausted, tired self, the angry, overburdened self, the self-conscious in front of my students self. So that page 5 might be the best place to start if it's teacher type overwhelm. And what I have people do, and you could even do if you have this handout in front of you, is go through page 3 to 5 and highlight or circle any that are familiar to you, because knowledge is power. If you go no further than just getting to know your parts, you've already done a lot of work towards your mental wellness capacity. And so when you get to the end of this handout, the last couple of pages are going to provide you with some activities for reflection. And you can see there's a lot of ideas there. I'm a huge proponent of reflection, whether it's just by myself in nature, walking around and thinking and connecting with my brain, or whether it's on paper through journaling. That's going to be your greatest opportunity to get to know yourself. And I always tell people that the person you're going to spend the most time with in your entire life is yourself. So get to know them. Get to know who's underneath the hood and what they bring to the table, and how you can use that knowledge to your advantage. So here, here first, I frame what I call the Badlands. So if we end up in, or me anyway, if I end up in burnout, apathy, disassociation, depersonalization, loneliness, anxiety, numbness, depression, sleeplessness, these are the Badlands for me. And I'm going to be more apt to go there if I'm living in states of alarm or fear or alert more often than I'm in my calm state. What I like to do is say to people, recognize your signals that tell you you're getting to that point. Also pay attention to the signals that you're doing well. When I work with humans, I always do the temperature and stress level check-in. And part of that is learning about our states and figuring out indicators for maybe not doing so well, patterns for not doing so well. So we don't want to end up in the Badlands. How we avoid that is by maybe answering some of these reflective questions that help to support our parts. So if I was going to focus on overwhelm, for example, because that one came up a lot for you, I might ask, what is its role? How does it help me to manage my life? Overwhelm might allow me to check out. It might be my rationale for checking out. The minute I say I'm overwhelmed, it might be me letting myself off the hook. And that might be something I need in that moment. And so that's the kind of reflective work you're going to do with these parts components. What positive intent does it have for me? My overwhelm might have the intent to, force me to take some time off if I need it. What's it trying to protect me from? Stress, from too much work, right? Is it happy with its job? Well, no, not always, because sometimes when I subscribe to those overwhelming feelings and I do what they tell me to do, I then feel guilty or I notice I've disassociated and my overwhelm sent me to the doom scrolls for a few hours, right? Look at all that stress on there with notifications. So I'm just going to go inside and out of some of these parts that show up in our life and, boss us around and demand us to behave in certain ways. So screenshot this, take a look at how you might use this for self-reflection if you're going to do some parts work with the people that you work with after you share the rationale for why we want to understand at least the brain and mind this way, and give that a try. The other component I wanted to show you here with respect to parts work is what Schwartz calls the 8 C's of self-energy and self-leadership. And I can't remember if it's Schwartz or if it's Goddard here who talks about the 5 P's of personal power. But these are antidotes to stress, to overwhelm, to those parts that boss us around and create negativity and ill health in our life. And, I investigate all the time what I do to support curiosity in my life, what I do to support calm, what confidence means to me and how I can work to achieve that. Clarity, courage, creativity, connectedness. There's lots of different ways to engage with these C words. I did give you in the handout an entire section that goes through what each of them mean and how you can potentially harness the power of those. So again, that's an invitation for reflective work. I like to invite people to do 10 to 20 minutes a day of reflective work. If you focused on 1 C a day for a week or so, you'd be able to get a good understanding of which of the C's support you to maintain calm. I'm definitely more in the curious zone than I am in the creative zone. I really thrive on learning and knowledge. I seek it out. It's part of my hobby. And in reflection on that, I come to a lot of perspective and understanding around the immense amount of work that I do. And I realize, I do a lot of work like this, I'm working into the evening recording this video for you. But it allows me to let my curiosity and, passion for this work to have a space to thrive. That in and of itself boosts my confidence, gives me more courage to keep showing up for the kind of work that I love to do. And it allows me to connect to other humans, especially when I land in the classroom space like I did this morning with Chelsea and the group. The other 5 P's of personal power, investigate these. How can you practice patience with yourself, with others? Presence, persistence, perspective, playfulness. These are things we need to be purposeful about infusing in our life, practicing. Practice makes progress, they say, not practice makes perfect. So we're never aiming for perfection. We're aiming for progressing, evolving, learning, and allowing these things to help us to be well. So again, screenshot it, reflect on it. If you're doing this work, you're going to be a better leader, encouraging others to do this work. And if you do any of the reflective work I've suggested this evening and you get to know yourself a little better, you're going to show up as a better leader, more informed leader in terms of mental health, and B, you're going to be more of a salesperson or a cheerleader for why others should get invested in this too, to support change in behavior or motivation or well-being. So I'm going to leave that area for now, and I'm going to chat briefly about task management. This is the shortest section of today's presentation. really because this work is in the cognitive zone. So we're only doing this work when we're online. When we're overwhelmed, we're not going to be thinking about how do I chunk and block my my workload, where do I prioritize, what do I do first, how do I plan. That's just way too overwhelming when we're offline. We want to do this work when we are online, calm, cool, and collected. And in that sense, it's really easy material to absorb. So a couple of things I suggest to maximize task management are, number one, chunking and blocking our time. So that is looking at a calendar and using what I call, or what is known as, backwards planning. What are all the tasks I have to do this week, including self-care, including a few minutes of self-reflection every day, including rest. And then figuring out where in the calendar that time is going to fit and sticking to it. So what blocks of time am I in class? Am I at work? Am I supporting the kids? Am I doing self-care? Am I managing my readings? Am I completing my assignments, studying for my tests? Wow, that's a lot. You don't want to get behind on that. You've chosen a profession where organization can be key to surviving and thriving. And if you can learn to block or chunk your time to support prioritizing and staying on track, then you're going to have better organization. Another planning tool that I use is what's known as stop light planning or traffic light planning. It's looking at all of the things we need to do and categorizing them into 3 areas. This is how we prioritize. So I've got the need to do now category, the I can do it or need to do it soon category, and the it can wait category. And so what I often do is write down all the things on my to-do list for today, tomorrow, the next few days, and then I separate them out and I just attack them one component at a time. Remember, we're not going to do it all. We're just going to do the next needed thing. And if I categorize and I know what needs to be done now, I'm going to be able to attend to that. So stoplight planning can also help with that. This is just a little chart for chemically aware self-care. That's the somatic self-care piece that I taught you previously. I've used this bar graph to help me keep track of how much self-care I'm doing in each of the areas. So is my self-care enhancing serotonin, which is the happiness hormone? Is my self-care enhancing oxytocin, which is the love, the connectedness hormone? Do I do things in my day that allow me to healthfully increase dopamine if I'm a dopamine chaser? And what do I do to healthfully, use up and push through some of those chemicals like adrenaline, and even cortisol? What do I do to flush out cortisol? I've got to get active in my life to push some of those chemicals out of my body. And so when I think about my self-care from those chemical components, it helps me to make sure that I'm balanced, right? And I'm all about balance in terms of my own well-being. So if you want access to that document and a little bit better explanation, just reach out to me. But really, you can Google task management, self-care, and some of these things and find access to tools online that can support you. It's really just about when you are in your thinking brain, when you are well, when you are not overwhelmed, starting to think about how you can get ahead of overwhelm by prioritizing, blocking off your time, setting good boundaries. One of the things that I learned that was a key feature of my own success when it came to overwhelm was chunking my study time, my reading time, chunking the activities that I'm more averse to, things I don't want to do, with activities that are good for my health. So I used to spend a whole 6 or 8 hour day on readings and assignments, maybe in my undergrad or even my master's program. And I quickly discovered that the idea I had that I had to just plow through it all was leading to ill health for me. And when I learned about chunking, I figured out that a great ratio for me was about 45 minutes of work time backed with 10 or 15 minutes of a walk or a break, or a snack, or just anything that took me away from the work for a few minutes and allowed me to have some downtime. And you will find that if you chunk your work time with downtime or self-care time or reflective time or rest time, that you're going to be more productive. So, like I said, I used to think that I had to just keep churning out productivity to get things done, but it was counter productive to my well-being, which then started to decrease my productivity. So I do encourage you that when you are having these long days, long nights, long weekends of doing homework, trying to get ahead of lesson planning, trying to do it all, that you chunk your time and infuse breaks that support your self-care and your well-being. So that's about where I ended today. I'm at the 75-minute mark, so I went over by a good few minutes here. And I hope that if you missed the live presentation, you feel like you gained something from spending some time with me. If you have any questions about any of this work, as always, just reach out. And remember, going back to where I started, you don't have to be all things to all people. You just have to show up. You just have to take care of yourself and be there to foster community, connection, relationship, and help people take one step at a time towards managing their life and their mental health. So take care, and we'll see you next time.